Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and today I am happily joined by Groom, co-author with April Vellacott of Ripple, The Big Effects of Small Behavior Changes in Business. Now, when he's not writing incredible books, he's the founder of Cowrie Consulting, a team of 30-plus behavioral scientists seeking to make work as humanly possible. He's here today to talk about the practical application of behavioral science to the world of work. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for that introduction. I sound amazing. Who is this guy?
No, you do sound amazing. And I want to start with that amazingness. I mean, you head up one of the largest team of behavioral scientists around. And I'm just curious, we're going to spend the bulk of our conversation today talking about some of the specific anecdotes in your book, because I think they're really compelling. But I want to start with sort of a broad overview. I think there's no one better positioned to talk about the application of behavioral science to the world of work than you. Where are we at? Where do you see us headed? And what's your sort of outlook for the industry?
So, I mean, I'm super excited around like this next decade. So, the first decade of behavioral science, was people figuring things out, making mistakes, being experimental, working, in partnership with businesses. And I really do think that we've hit essentially that upwards trajectory of the kind of adoption curve. So, I'm really sort of think we're following a similar sort of, I suppose, path as like technology, so often we've got kind of those innovators and early adopters and at the beginning of the curve. And I really do think we're hitting like the early majority. And there's some things we've figured out about how the market is evolving and changing, which I think is giving us a really good sort of advantage in the market. And but yeah, it's super exciting. But I think one of the favorite quotes I like is, it's like it's taken like behavioral science 10 years to become like an overnight success. I think certainly in business. I think one of the things, Dan, I think to qualify, there's some amazing, massive businesses, I think within behavioral science. So Basara, I think, is an amazing business. Behavioral Insights team is an amazing organization. And Ideas 42, and they focus on not profit and policy. And I think the business world is just catching up. So yeah, whether we'll have a business of 100 people, who knows? But yeah, it's exciting times.
I think at least from where I sit, I'm biased, of course. I see a lot of application to the world of finance just because that's sort of where I do my work, and I see some exciting things happening there. Of course, you have people like Ideas 42 applying behavioral insights to government and policy and procedural things like that. What do you think is sort of the next big unexplored vertical for behavioral science? Where are we starting to make some inroads that will blossom over the next 10 years?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I'm happy to say publicly now is behavioral science people are amazing at behavioral science, but I just don't think they're that good at business and focus. All right. And I think you're exactly right. Like in business, I think financial services has definitely taken the charge. There's more CBOs in that area, bigger teams, more advanced teams. I think retail has always been strong. So we've seen sort of teams come and go in some retailers. And but I think, as technology changes and how physical stores change, digital stores, I think retail, utilities, like the complexity of utilities is only going to increase. People having to embrace and engage with, how is my bill worked out and how are wholesale prices affecting consumer prices? So essentially, I think people are getting heads around that. But I think the key massive area for me is in health. So I really do think that there's been a lot of essentially tech development in health, but I think behavioral science hasn't been running in two-step with that. And there's a lot of opportunity in there for some big problems that the world has got. So yeah, and then sustainability. I think there's been a lot of great work been done in behavioral science and sustainability. And but yeah, I would say health. Some of these kind of lifestyle diseases that we've got that we can sort of shape better with better behaviors. That's where my head's at.
Yeah, I constantly find myself drawing parallels between the world of diet, exercise, fitness, health, and the world of finance. In both cases, the correct behaviors are, I think, widely known and seldom practiced. Simple but not easy. And I think it's in those sorts of places where behavioral science really can work its magic. But we're here today to talk primarily about the book, and I want to have you share 3 anecdotes. We're going to leave most of them untouched because people need to put some money in your pocket and buy the book. But I want to whet some appetites today by talking about 3 that were of particular interest to me. And I'll start with the case study that's probably the most germane to listeners of this show, which was around saving money, specifically helping folks in the UK save money. And if you could, specifically, I want you to touch on the outcomes versus outputs mindset that you address in that chapter. So set it up for us. What was the sort of case study, and what were the practical things that emerged from the case study in terms of helping regular folks save more money?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it earlier that the financial sort of future of most people is in the future, is complex, is often ambiguous, and it's difficult to imagine yourself being in that future self. So that's why it's a really kind of healthy, fertile area for behavioural sort of science. One of the things that I'm really keen to do is democratize the use of behavioural insights, and I suppose change and redesign the world of future finances to make it easy to understand and offset some of the inherent biases and shortcuts that we have. And so it's the language we use. One of the things that we often talk about is sort of common sense. So if you're going to explain a product to a consultant surgeon that's really good at heart surgery, they just don't understand what SIP stands for as a pension sort of tool, or what a portfolio of funds means, what a management charge is, what a crystallized pension scheme is, what a crystallized lump sum is, what a money purchase sort of an annual allowance. These types of things, it's just jargon that they understand the jargon in heart surgery, but they don't understand the jargon in our financial services. So we often say, talk to people in simple terms and coach and mentor them and reward them for good behavior. And that could be as simple as explaining things in terms that normal people would understand, and then reward them, which might be as simple as saying, well done, you've got that, thank you, for some of the things which they're starting to embrace and do. So, there's 3 things that you should really understand about a pension. I'm going to talk to you about those 3 things. Would that be okay? Yeah. Okay, here are the 3 things. And at the end of it saying, so do you understand kind of where we're headed in terms of your decision making? Yes. Are you going to do something about it? Yes. When are you going to do it? I think I'll do it next week. Okay, let's check in maybe a week's time or 2 weeks' time to see if you've progressed. These aren't hard things, but often they're uncommon. So some of the language we often use is uncommon sense. So some of these very, very simple behavioural sort of tools that we use are just uncommonly practiced, and baking them into the service and experience design of financial services organisations is really important. So we do a lot of conversational redesign, a lot of customer relationship management, customer experience, to essentially simplify things a lot of the time and provide people with the right information at the right time, and build their expertise over time and reward them for that. Not financially, but just say, God, you're doing really, really well. Dan, you're doing really well. You go, that's good. I'll do more of this. So I think that's some of them. And from a commercial benefit, it is mutual. So it's obviously in the benefit of a pension company. So we work with a lot of pension companies that if people essentially are bringing their pensions together, they're actively managing them, not overactively, but actively managing them. They understand how much they're being charged and what the value of that guidance or advice might be. And they're empowered to essentially make some changes based on what their life stages are. Then that is really, really good. That's really, really good. And so I think that's, in terms of kind of, I think outputs versus outcomes. So I think behavioral science is going through a few sort of phases of this. I think the first one, maybe the first 10 years of discovery, is that I don't know about yourself or other behavioral science on the call, but most of our recommendations essentially stayed there. So essentially the output was a recommendation in a PowerPoint or a Google slide document that never, ever got executed, right? You presented it, do this, it will be great. And I think we've really, really shifted that on as an industry, that now we're very experimental, we're very interventionist, and we're driving through, I think, some really, really good short-term outcomes. So I think the shift from PowerPoint to real-world experimentation with real interventions with real short-term outcomes is really, really true. I think the next big shift for me is longitudinal analysis of outcomes and what those outcomes might be. Because, especially in financial services and health, as you said, that like sometimes, you might have an intermediate action which leads to some form of good outcome, but it's the accumulation of those outcomes over years that actually can get people to a place where they do actually have a lifetime of financial security, or they've got a healthy body that can take them on for an active lifestyle into their 70s, 80s and 90s. And, I think that's where behavioural science has really got to grow up. I mean, it is a bit harsh because obviously you can't do longitudinal analysis on a field that's only been alive really for about 10 years. But I think that's certainly where we're at, is working with some of these sort of businesses to start thinking about, rather than a one-off experiment, how can we work? And, I think from your experience and other chief behavioural officers, I think you're best placed to do that because you're in the businesses for a long period of time. Whereas as an external consultant like myself, that's often not the case. So I think, there's a lot of work that can be done from new behavioural science teams in organisations on longitudinal analysis. And I think you and others are embracing that.
So I want to go back to the money saving piece. You talked about the importance of getting away from jargon, which I think is self-evident and powerful. Even if we as an industry aren't very great at it, I think most people understand that sort of intuitively, and we're headed in that direction. I want to talk about making a plan, though, because what you're talking about there is we've seen something similar in voting, right? If you call people and remind them to vote, you get some sort of bump, right? You get some sort of bump from that pre-commitment, but you get a much larger bump if you say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, are you going to vote? Oh, yeah, I'm going to vote. Okay, when are you going to vote? How are you going to vote? What are you going to do with your kids? Where's your polling place? When we sort of walk them through. So can you talk about the importance of that making a plan and the importance of that granularity? Because I think the behavioral sciences, at least early on, have sometimes done a disservice about talking about how irrational and broken and fallible people are. Most people want to vote. They want to exercise. They want to save for their kids' college. They want to do these things, but life gets in the way. So can you talk about the power of making a plan?
Yeah. So I think that the specificity that you talk about is really, really important. And it doesn't work all of the time, but early on in kind of my kind of behavioral science career, my children were a little bit younger. So I've got a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old. And they're relatively okay in terms of their social media usage and their gaming console usage. But when you've got a child that's kind of maybe 8 or 9 or 10, maybe social media 12, 13, like getting them off their devices and getting to interact in the real world with the parent, it is a challenge. So one of the things I used to sort of use is exactly that commitment device. So I would say, so when are you going to come off your iPad? And they go later. And I go, no. Like, what time? And they go, 9 o'clock. I go, okay, so you're going to come off your iPad at 9 o'clock. And they go, yeah. And I go, okay, can you say to me out loud, Dad, I will come off my iPad at 9 o'clock. And then even sometimes that we've learned, I think the specificity of odd numbers makes things more salient. So 9:05 or 9:10 or whatever it is something which feels more has greater specificity. So I think the granularity and the specificity and then the commitment and the saying out loud, all of that helps to that point, and creates dissonance because we know that people like to be, consistent actors, consistent with their previous selves, and you can really see it in action. And I think setting up as many different hacks. I don't think it's always about having a plan. So I think you can say you're going to do things, you can write things down, but I think designing the environment to prompt those things. So, I'm a firm believer in, I'm agnostic around kind of the behavioral frameworks and models, but, BJ's model, around BMAP, that. That's really, really helpful as a contextual kind of element. I think so. Yeah, I think one of the big leaps that we've got to make, I think, is domain dependency and context around behaviour and around health. And around finances. It's not enough just to have like a text reminder, like to do something. I think for some of these behaviors, we do need to have like a contextual framework, a social framework, a personal framework, and essentially have all of them working together. So that would be kind of my ideal plan would be, I say to myself, I'm going to exercise. I tell my wife I'm going to exercise, and then I put my trainers outside, outside the bed. Those three essentially go, I don't want to be inconsistent with myself. I want people around me to help me on my journey, and I've set the environment to essentially prompt or trigger the action. Those things I think, and even then sometimes it gets in the way, right? So you have a bad night's sleep, and then all of a sudden, all those three hacks don't work. But I think one of the big get out of jail cards for behavioral scientists at the moment is, well, behavior is domain dependent, context really matters. And I am bored, frustrated, from hearing that kind of get out of jail. It's like, well, what do you mean about the context? How do we measure essentially and identify and define how the context is affecting behaviour? And then how do we evidence that empirically? And it's complicated for sure, but that's kind of like next gen. That's where I think we'll get some really, really good stuff. And we're just not there yet, I don't think.
Yeah, I love a couple of things about that. You've got the specificity, the granularity. You have it across sort of personal, social, environmental contexts, each one of those working in your favor. And I think you also demonstrated nicely, one of the things that I love about behavioral science is that the same lessons we use to help people save more money can help us be better parents. I think behavioral science is something that can improve your life, your marriage, your parenting skills. I think holistically, in addition to having great power at work. Okay, so number 2, the one that stuck out to me, because America has a huge prison problem. 1% of Americans are in jail at any given time, which is a staggering statistic. And a big part of that is recidivism. Folks go into jail, they go out, they aren't sort of properly rehabilitated, and they're sort of in and out of the system for life. In chapter 9 of your book, you talk about the behavioral science of decreasing prison recidivism and criminal reoffense. Can you talk more about that study and sort of which behavioral principles were at play?
Yeah. So I suppose what was interesting is the first observation was not enough time is invested, I don't think, into providing a good experience for people in rehabilitation. So it's a good. So it's just genuinely interesting that it's everybody's interest to essentially provide an amazing experience for those people not to reoffend. And so that's kind of one observation I think we had was that we were working with people that would been in jail and then they were out on probation. And what we were trying to enhance, to make better, was better adherence to alcohol programs, better rehabilitation, drug addiction programs, and also community service programs. And so I just think it's just kind of strange sometimes that we focus so much on how can we get people to use Amazon Go and all this new kit, when actually we've got some fundamental things wrong in our society that we need to fix, that actually, should those people be worthy of a good experience? Shouldn't it just be a bad experience because they've done something bad? So I thought that was quite interesting. And the truth is to say that actually, you can fix things really, really simply. So one of the problems that we have is there's just not enough resource, right? There's just not enough resource. So so some of the probation officers, essentially the case managers, they were doing quite a lot of administration. So highly skilled, care providers, if you like, rehabilitation providers, that were doing quite a lot of administration, and it didn't make sense to do that. So the premise was, can we take that administration sort of away from them? And then centralize it. So essentially get some form of best practice and economies of scale. So rather than having some people in areas of the country that had really good administration, some people had pretty bad administration, why don't we provide more centralized resources and best class? And jury was out. So I think some regions did really well at this and some regions didn't. So that the UK government is kind of flip-flop from going to fully centralized to going back to kind of some form of hybrid. But some of the areas where essentially they weren't doing it as well, was where we spent a bit of time. They were doing some good stuff, but they weren't doing it as well. So like, if someone's come out of jail and they want to speak to their probation officer, their case manager, they ring a number, and they went through to a contact centre. So they'd go through to a contact centre, and these people have got quite a lot of expertise in terms of diary management and the programme management, but they're not the actual probation officer. And when they'd answer the phone, they'd often answer the phone by saying, "Yeah, hi, my name's Jez. How can I help you?" And then down you would go, "Can I speak to my probation officer? Can I speak to case manager?" And then I go, "No, unfortunately, they're not available. They're with another service user at the moment. And can I get them to ring you back, or can I help?" And they go, "No, forget about it." And then the same person might ring you up like 5 minutes later and go, "Yeah, hi, can I speak to my probation officer?" So everyone gets frustrated in the process. So what we did is just change the front of the call, like literally a very, very small, precise kind of acute intervention at the beginning of the call, where essentially you'd ring up and rather than saying, "Hi, my name is Jez, how can I help you?" essentially, "Hi, my name is Jez. I'm a probation services consultant, and can I start by taking your name, please?" And so just flipping, I suppose, the beginning of the call to kind of a better experience, which essentially is one with authority. So I'm a consultant working in this area, and can I take your name, please? Essentially means that it means that I'm a better, I suppose, a more expert in my area. So simple, Cialdini's kind of authority bias. But what we found was that often people would then respect that expertise and say, "Yeah, actually, could I speak to my probation officer?" On which point, the person at the phone would say, "Unfortunately, not available at the moment with another service user, but can I make an appointment for you on Tuesday?" And they go, "Yes, that would be brilliant. Okay, Tuesday at 2:00, that's fine." So it's just a very, very simple acute intervention at the beginning of the call using authority bias. Honestly, completely kind of flipped the interaction such that it did two things. One, the person on probation respected that person and felt like they'd been serviced well. But brilliantly, it meant that the people that are dealing with essentially interactions with some nice people that went to jail, but some people that aren't very nice, it just made their jobs a lot better because they're just having better interactions with the people who they deal with. So they're less likely to go for, I suppose, services to help them. So make them more vulnerable, and also improve their sort of their own well-being and confidence in themselves, belief in themselves, and also lower kind of attrition rates. So we see that quite a lot, that when we start to make people feel good about themselves, about what they do every day, sometimes these guys take 20 calls a day, actually they're less likely to leave their work and feel more fulfilled. So I think that was kind of like a very kind of small example about changing a simple part of the conversation to essentially help both parties quite dramatically.
One of the things that I think behavioral science is up against is that seemingly small interventions can have a really dramatic impact. Something like sort of reorienting the flow of a phone call, or the simple nod to authority bias. These things are seemingly small, but the impact they can have is tremendous. How in your work, when you come back to someone who's paid you good money for a project and you say, "Hey, we're gonna redo the phone call," and they go, "What? What? This is gonna help prison recidivism?" How do we as an industry fight against this idea that grand behavioral changes need grand behavioral interventions, and how can we get people to appreciate the sort of small and simple things?
Yeah, I think we were all quite guilty. So I've been here for 12, 13 years, being paid for by other people. So not just talking about it. And I think it's fair to say that the way that we talked about behavioral science was small changes can lead to big effects, right? And that was guaranteed broadly, and not guaranteed every time, but it was kind of like all the books were like, we're just crazy, just flick the switch and you get 100% behavior change. I'm exaggerating to make a point, but that's kind of, I think, was the sense. And I think where we are now is to say that behavioral science is amazing. I think there are some outliers that are the amazing case studies, the flying the urinals and the asymmetric relative frame of the economist, those types of outliers. But I think what we talk about at Cowrie essentially is lots of small interventions clustered around certain parts of the experience, all working together. And it's 101% rather than 100% moonshot. And I think that's where we are headed as a consultancy, is to say that behavioral science is predictable and systematic. It is complex, and often it's the multiplicity of lots of small changes aggregated over time and repeated over time that can get you to some scalability. But often it does require heterogeneity in the intervention style. So you might need 6 different types of interventions for 6 different behavioral personas to get you to anywhere near 50, 60, 70% behavior change. And I don't think we've talked enough about that. Just essentially, I think that the story that's been sold is just do this one thing. We're homogeneous, it's predictable and systematic, and you're going to get 100% behavior change. And actually, what we're talking about now is to say, let's look at the universe of people. Let's look at the behaviors that we need to change. Let's look at the behavioral personas, and let's build essentially a portfolio of lots of small interventions that cluster around different sort of heterogeneity of persona to get you to a scalable behavior change. And so I think that's definitely I think where we're at, because the days of sending a text message to get people to fill out their tax returns, it to me is an outlier. It's a brilliant outlier. But a lot of the behaviours that we're looking to address now are just far more complex and, as I said, longitudinal. So I don't think a text message is going to crack future health or future finance.
Yeah, you make a great point. As I begin to see behavioral interventions baked into certain technology, I'll go to hotels.com and see, 27 other people are looking at this hotel, or this hotel is 78% full. Sort of using social proof and other things to try and nudge you to act. I do think we become sort of inured to them. We become sort of immune to them, or as they become more pervasive. So I think that behavioral scientists will have to stay on their toes and keep working to make sure that people don't become immune to these things.
Yeah, for sure. If you've got somebody that comes to hotels.com like every week, there are maybe a business, not recently, but, then clearly you might need a different suite of, I suppose, techniques, nudges, behavioral science interventions to get them to the same place as they were before. But for new people to the site, that might be fine. And I think that's definitely the case. Yeah, I agree.
So the last one that we'll talk about, we know obesity is a big problem around the world. In the past few years now, for the first time in human history, more people are dying from obesity than from want. Increasingly, we've addressed the problem of world hunger. It still exists, but we're making big progress there. And now a new problem has stepped in to replace it, which is effectively people eating too much. So I love the chapter on tackling obesity in Mexico, because effectively behavioral science was used to shape the behavior of an entire country. Talk to us about that effort and what you found there.
Yeah, so again, kind of one of the evolutions, I think, of behavioral science is that, small things can lead to big changes. And, my previous career was kind of more advertising, marketing, where their focus is always the big idea. Like they want the big idea. And I think, the obesity problem needs big ideas and small ideas. I really, really do believe that. So to change the way a nation thinks requires kind of like big TV programs that essentially are talking about, how healthy families can live their lives and create essentially that social proof. So none of this is new. Designated driver in the 80s in big TV programs has been well celebrated. So normalizing healthy behavior, utilizing broadcast media or social media is really important. So we created a TV show with essentially the top producer who produced a lot of the soaps in Mexico, to create a healthy family sort of program. It wasn't about weight loss. That was the critical thing. It wasn't about just weight loss. It was about being healthy and being, feeling good about yourself. So I think that's pretty critical. So we weren't necessarily just focusing on that. Because, I think healthy lifestyles embrace a lot more. And then the behavioral interventions piece was essentially adding into the show kind of like different ideas about how we can promote sort of healthier behaviors. And you need loads of them. Like the heterogeneity that I talked about before is, the diverse nature of everyone's different contexts mean that you just need lots and lots of things. So, how do you get people to drink more water? We had essentially glasses or plastic glasses, and They were glasses or plastic, I can't remember. And but they had like faces, so you could play like Guess Who. So essentially, you could hold it up. You couldn't see what's on the bottom of your glass, but essentially, you could ask questions to other people. So essentially, playing a game around drinking water. My favourite was there was a brilliant insight around, like, in Mexico, that when you eat, not everybody, but there was a perception when you eat salads or when you eat fruit, it means that you're ill. So, like, that's the only time you'd ever reach out for something which is particularly healthy, which is quite funny. And that was driven by the male patriarch. So essentially, we wanted to change that. So we gave ourselves this brief, was like, how do you make fruit and vegetables more macho? So essentially, the fathers, the uncles, and they would go, look, I'm the guy. So we created an arm wrestling juicer. And it was genius. So essentially, it was like, we've got a WWE star in Mexico to essentially promote that, like, it was macho to essentially mash your fruit. And we had like an arm wrestling juicer. So it was like, it was like this, an arm of a wrestler, and that was the handle. And it was the guys that had to do it. So essentially, we're getting them to kind of promote it. My favorite insight of that, which we did put in the book, was that it's certainly in the UK, was that setting kind of like salient defaults is really, really important. And most kitchen appliances, certainly in the UK, there's the toaster and there's the kettle. I know it's different in America with maybe the coffee machine, but there's certain things that are staple and they stay on the counter. They don't go anywhere. But other appliances, they get used for 2 weeks and then they get put away in the cupboard. So we had this insight, which was, how can we make the arm wrestling juicer too big to fit in the cupboard? Like, you couldn't physically get it in, so it would always be on the counter. And we had an argument with the product design company because from their perspective, from I suppose a form function, it just didn't look as beautiful as it could do in the right kind of size. And we were saying from a function perspective, it's critical this just doesn't get put away, because that's what happens. So yeah, the idea of the arm wrestling juicer that's sat on the countertop in Mexico was born. And going back to that previous theme, is we had a digital platform where people essentially could vote for their best ideas, and the products can get produced. They could download some of the simpler interventions around sort of like plate sizes, etc. And the interactions were huge. But again, it comes back to that outputs versus outcomes. The output was an intermediate behaviour. Someone's done an activity, but the longitudinal analysis still needs to be done. And that's true, I think, for behavioural scientists across the world. But yeah, it was an amazing piece of work, because we had product design linked with kind of service and experience design digitally, based around a big platform. So big ideas and small ideas, I think, are really important for some of the biggest problems in the world.
I love it. There's a couple of points in that case study where, I think when you think about approaching obesity, you go, okay, well, one of the things that contributes to obesity is watching too much television. We know that, right? And so there would be a natural impulse to say, oh, we got to get people to stop watching TV. But instead, you meet those people where they're at, right? You say, okay, You're watching TV. Here's a program on healthy living, right? Here's a program on healthy living. You meet them where they're at. And, okay, there's this culture of machismo. Like, you could try and reorient a culture that's, eons old, or you could work with the culture and say, look, we're just going to make eating fruits and vegetables more of a macho thing. I think a lot of the most effective behavioral interventions kind of flow with culture, flow with our natural tendencies, and find a way to exploit those natural tendencies for our own benefit. Think about the Save More Tomorrow program, which exploits status quo bias for investor benefit, things like that. I think wherever possible, we should sort of roll with punches rather than try to block them.
I totally agree. I mean, I'm sort of conflicted, I think, on next episode on Netflix. So, television kind of, because I've been involved in media for like 30 years, but like television sort of program formats, they did kind of fit into the way that we live our lives. So essentially we had a half-hour format, hour formats for kind of TV, an hour and a half broadly for cinema. And I sometimes get conflicted by the ethics of next episode and just defaulting into a binge and go, is that healthy? Like, is that really, really healthy? If we did it in other areas, I don't think ethically we would say it's okay. Okay, so you've been to a shop at Walmart, but hey, why don't we put you into another shop at Walmart that's just in the car park, and then another, and you can keep on shopping. It's great, And I do, I am conflicted to go, surely, game manufacturers and I think media providers, platform providers should be, I think, helping us have healthy viewing and screen-based behaviours. And I totally think that's true. And yeah, I think sometimes like financial services, health, utilities, they come under massive scrutiny from regulators. But I think there are some domains that actually I think impact far worse sometimes with not so good behaviours. So next episode, or Jez, you've been watching for 2 hours, I think you should take a break. That for me would be, I think, where Netflix should go. And certainly from an obesity perspective, 5 hours of watching TV in a single go, it maybe isn't the right thing.
Yeah, I read a stat recently that said the introduction of that simple next episode button on Netflix had increased viewing times by 70%, which is pretty incredible to think about. And it is a great ethical question. Do the companies that we frequent have an ethical obligation for us to do the right thing? Well, you could debate whether or not that's the case. I think more of them than not don't act ethically, and you have to count on them to act in their own best interest, and you have to kind of look out for yourself, or do business with people who are looking out for you.
Yeah. I mean, Uber, obviously they were essentially, I think that their behavioral science team was really massively impacted from nudging drivers to drive more, and because it was in their interest. But for some reason, watching more and sitting on the sofa seems okay. And I'm not so sure.
Yeah. So last question for you, Jez, is a personal question. You've done all this great research. You've helped people all over the world change their lives for the better. How do you apply behavioral science to the betterment of your own life? Which of these tips and tricks do you apply to your own life?
Yeah. So I think like even when you know stuff, like sometimes you can use as many behavioral hacks as you want, but sometimes the world still gets in the way, or life still gets in the way. I think that's what I have learned. So defaulting activity into my personal calendar so I can see it and my team can see it. So during the pandemic I would do that. Yoga at 7, So I think that does work. So essentially calendar, regular, habitual, sort of physical behaviors. And but so I think that definitely helped during the pandemic. I think having having a dog, right? So having pets. I know like some people are just like really anti-pet, and I'm not like cutesy pet. Like, but I've got an amazing sort of Labrador, and I kind of recently said, we've got a well-being platform and where we fund activities and stuff like that. And I just said, I'm really happy with my well-being because I've got a dog, I've got a loving family and stuff like that. But I've got sort of physical exercise twice a day. I've got kind of empathy and warmth and connectivity and feedback from a dog, which they're daft. They're just positive all the time. And but connectivity with the dog walkers, so I go out for a walk. I don't really know their names, but I chat to maybe like 10 people on that walk. So I think, certainly I think. Calendar invites around regular positive behaviours, I think is good just to sometimes life gets in the way. But I think taking it to another level where you've got kind of like a commitment of and a trust and a bond to do something. And obviously that happens at work, it happens in families, in this case, sort of pets. I think one of the things that obviously working in finance is like trying to understand like, your future finances. I think I've been lucky to do that professionally, which has really helped me sort of personally. And because you mentioned Save More Tomorrow, I think Save More Tomorrow is brilliant for maybe the like civil service or government employees where they generally stay in the same employer. I know you have 401k in the States, but like in the UK, like, I've had about 7 employers, so I've got 7 pension pots, and I had to engage with them and consolidate them and understand them. So I think having the ability to kind of think about how much money I might need for me and the family, I think has really helped. So I would say calendar defaults is really, really powerful. Some form of, I suppose, connectivity, which I suppose transcends kind of more that transactional sort of level. And then the final piece would be, I think, engage with the future self. I'm pretty good on finance, not as good on health, I think. And so, there's some sort of things, I walk twice a day with the dog usually. And but I think there's some more that I could be doing sort of in that area for sure. And but as you get closer and closer to that point, it becomes more important, I guess. So, but yeah, I think those sort of things. Now, what I don't want to do is kind of say use saliency to do this. Use authority bias to do that. I think there's some sort of simple things that I think are far more effective, and those would be certainly things that work for me.
Yeah. Well, the book is fantastic. You're doing incredible work. And thank you as well for being one of the folks that's been so instrumental in sort of gathering the perspectives and sort of gathering all the chief behavioral officers together to put our heads together and talk about the future of the profession. If people want to read the book, give us the name one more time. If people want to learn more about your work, where can we find you?
Yeah, so the book's called Ripple, and I co-wrote it with April. So the story's mine, and April wrote all the words. She's got a new book out, or a new chapter of the book, so definitely look out for that. So I think it's the inspirational investor, I think, for April. In terms of myself, I've got a website, behavioraleconomist.com. So obviously I got in quite early to get that URL, and then carryconsulting.com for the business. And then also as well, like you mentioned, I'm also part of a big network of behavioral scientists called Diversify Global. I think, my kind of ambition, I guess, and hopefully legacy is like behavioral science is amazing, but it just needs to be delivered at scale. We need to design the world better. So we need more people thinking about the things that really matter to the human brain rather than, writing algorithms that can make people money, So I'm firmly in that case. And we're on that trajectory, which is really, really good. There's some really bright people doing behavioral science, and we just need more.
Yeah, well, you're certainly one of them, sir. So thank you for sharing your insights with us today. And it's been a pleasure to have you on.
No, thanks for having me on. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.